Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the political updates because they are very interesting. Ukraine's membership in NATO is incredibly unlikely, and this position is held not only by the United States of America but also by other members of the alliance. A settlement in Ukraine will involve Kiev giving up some territory in exchange for future security guarantees. That was stated by the White House. Another important thing that Marco Rubio said that the plan to end the conflict in Ukraine consists of two parts, Part A and Part B. Part A is a ceasefire, Part B is a meeting of the parties at the negotiation table, possibly with the participation of mediators. According to him, negotiations can only begin after a ceasefire. Another important statement made by Witkov. During contacts in Ukraine, a potential agreement on the Black Sea and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant are being discussed. If you remember, we've been talking a lot about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and according to the original plan of Zelensky, he wanted to change the territory around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the power plant itself for the Sudzha direction, but as a result of the previous Russian offensive operation, the Ukrainians were completely defeated in that area, and the Ukrainians lost. Zelensky himself personally lost that trump card. There are regions where, as we all know, Russians are concentrated. There is a nuclear reactor that supplies electricity to Ukraine. We need to discuss this. Access to ports is a potential agreement on the Black Sea, said Trump special representative Stephen Witkov, who recently visited Moscow. He added that a positive trend has been outlined in the negotiations in Ukraine, and there is a hope for a quick peace agreement. Earlier, Zelensky confirmed that the topic of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was raised during the negotiations between Ukraine and the United States of America in Jeddah. Trump also stated that the issue of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was raised during the negotiations, and the question of who should own the station will be discussed after the start of the truce in the process of preparing a peace agreement. If you ask my opinion, I would tell you that the Russians don't need this Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because you know that currently the Russians control the territory of LPR, DPR, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Crimea, and the Russians found a solution how to supply and support these territories with electricity. So basically, from this perspective, the Russians don't need this electricity, because if the Russians save control over this power plant, the only thing they will be able to do is to supply the electricity to the territory of Ukraine. So that's why the Russians will get money from Ukraine, and obviously Ukrainians don't want this. They after the post-war period of time is going to be very difficult for Ukraine, despite the fact that probably many Western countries will invest money. Russia itself will invest money to rebuild Ukraine, but obviously this is going to be a very difficult period of time. So of course, to have control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant could be very nice step to restore Ukrainian economy. So now the process and now the talks are not like to exchange the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant for, let's say, the Sudzha direction. But now the talks probably is that the Russians can allow the Ukrainians to establish control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, let's say in exchange for the city of Pokrovsk, or let's say for the city of Slaviansk or Kramatorsk, because as you know there are still lots of territories to take for the Russians to restore complete control over the Donetsk region. So that's why now the deal can look like this, you know that, and probably this is very likely the development of the scenario of the situation. Anyway, despite the fact that we don't know exactly what is going to be next and what kind of negotiations are taking place, we know for sure one thing, that Russia will demand cast iron security guarantees, including neutral status for Ukraine when resolving the conflict, says Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Grushenko. Another important thing that probably, and according to the United States of America, according to Donald Trump, very likely the negotiation process and probably first talks, let's say official talks between Trump and Putin may have place tomorrow on the 18th of March of 2025. And this is very interesting, of course. Now let's move back to the line of combat contact, because despite all these talks, all this negotiation process, we know for sure that the Russians continue their offensive operation, and the Russians continue hunting and destroying Ukrainian forces along the entire line of combat contact. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces in the territory of the Chernigov region, and as a result of Iskander strike, the massive concentration of Ukrainian forces was destroyed. The Ukrainians lost up to 2 trucks, the Ukrainians lost up to 30 units, soldiers, and up to 65 fighters of the armed force of Ukraine. So the question is what the Ukrainians were doing in this part of the Chernigov region. Maybe the Ukrainians were planning to carry out another massive drone attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, or maybe the Russians are about to begin some offensive operation in this part as well. If you remember, several days ago Putin talked that it's time to start creating some security zone, and the only security zone the Russians need is to establish some no-fly zone for the Ukrainian drones when they try to attack the territory of the capital of the Russian Federation. We're talking about Moscow. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sudzha direction. The Ukrainians decided to copy the Russian new approach to secure main supply lines, and today first images occurred that Ukrainians began building the nests around the main supply lines somewhere in the vicinity of the city of Sumi. This allows the Ukrainians to save their vehicles and to reduce losses of their vehicles and fighters from the attack of the Russian FPV drones. So this is something that we saw already on the territory and around the city of Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. Now the Ukrainians decide to do something like this. So we believe that if the special military operation continues, most likely we are going to see these nests along the entire line of combat contact everywhere. Both sides will try to improve their supply lines with the purpose to reduce losses during the transportation, evacuation, rotation, and many other things. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. And as for the previous 24 hours, the main clashes took place in the vicinity of the village by the name of Guyevo. Yesterday late in the evening, the Russians published a video how they managed to establish complete control, not complete control, how the Russians raised their flag with drone in the most southern part of the settlement of Guyevo. Of course, it doesn't mean that the Russians secured the village completely, but the sources are saying that that was something like a media attack, and the main message of this attack, according to the Ukrainian sources, that the Russians established complete air control. So you know that in the past I didn't understand this, let's say, movement from both sides, the Russians or the Ukrainians, why both sides were trying to establish flag with drone, but now we understand the clear message of these actions. The main message is to show the opponent that the sky is already under complete control. So now you have no chances, for example, to bring drones in this area or to protect your troopers with the same drones while another Russian attack. So that is why we believe that the Ukrainians in the very near future, when they realize that they have no chances to establish control over the sky, they would be forced to fall back towards the settlement of Garnal. This information was also confirmed by pro-Russian resources, and furthermore, several neutral mappers also adjusted the map in the area of Guyevo in Russian favor. So maybe today the Minister of Defense will confirm this information, but as for example, the official Telegram channel of the Group of Forces North, they didn't say a word about the situation. So as for now, this territory is covered with the fog of war, but we believe that in the very near future, the Russians would take complete control over this territory. As for the city of Sudzha and Sudzha agglomeration, we continue receiving a lot of videos and a lot of updates about the trophies that the Russians managed to take under control, probably since the beginning of the last stage of the Sudzha counter-offensive operation. Hundreds of vehicles, hundreds of arms, hundreds of everything was captured by the Russians, and the Russians continue clearing this territory and continue taking more and more vehicles, weapons, grenades, grenade launchers, FPV drones, many other trophies. Obviously, the Russians with this weapon are able to organize or create another NATO, even army, NATO, let's say, type of army that can use just NATO arms or something like this. So the Ukrainians suffer significant losses, as we can see. Now they will have to take some time to restore their capabilities. Now let's move further. We continue receiving very interesting updates from the northern Kupiansk direction, where the main clashes are taking place along the river of Oskol, and the most important on the Ukrainian side of the river. During the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the vicinity of the village by the name of Kamianka. The first reports of this type we start receiving yesterday from pro-Ukrainian sources, but for some reason the pro-Ukrainian sources decided not to color everything but just to mark this territory as a contested area, so they didn't want to make panic with the situation. But today the neutral mappers and pro-Russian resources confirmed that indeed the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Kamianka to improve their positions and to take additional territories under complete control. So as we can see from this perspective, currently the Russians are trying to take the village of Kamianka in pincers and most likely then to capture. So if the situation continues developing the same way, most likely the Russians will finish the battle for the settlement of Kamianka in the very near future. We're talking about days, not about weeks. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Toretsk direction. According to information we have today, for the first time probably since the beginning of the battle for the city of Toretsk, the pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that indeed the situation in the area of the settlement is very poor, is very difficult. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers, as you can see, there are no more blocks on the territory of the city that under complete and strong control or by the Ukrainians. As for now, we have around 70% of the city under complete and strong control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and just 30% are marked by the Ukrainians as a contested area or the gray zone, which means that there are no positions under complete and strong control of the armed forces of Ukraine. And the most important, that Ukrainians also confirmed that there is a cauldron in the vicinity of the stadium where the Ukrainians were caught. So we don't know for sure the exact number of the Ukrainians that were caught here, but once again this information today was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources as well. So we see that Ukrainians are paying too high price for this settlement. Now let's move further. We have noted and discovered a huge, huge activities of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the Kostiantynivka direction. As you can see, during the previous 12 hours, we got a lot of icons exactly from this area. We see that the Russians are trying to secure and to clear the village of Tarasovka from many directions. All these things, all these icons tell us just about one thing. Most likely the Russians in the very near future are going to begin their offensive operation in this area with the purpose to shorten the distance between the Russians themselves and of course the Konstantinovka agglomeration, or at least the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir. So we see activities. We expect Russian offensive in the very near future towards the settlement by the name of Tarasovka, and most likely the Russians will try to make first attempts to attack the village by the name of Alexandropol, which is located a bit to the northeast of the original positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Very heavy clashes continues on the territory of the settlement by the name of Lysivka. Today the Russian sources published a video how one Russian soldier was fighting with 3 Ukrainian soldiers and 1 Russian soldier came a winner from this battle. Based on this video we have adjusted the map because the main clashes of this video took place exactly in this point. We see that the Russians managed to take initiative in their hands and now they're just trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of Vasylivka and Vasylivka. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and we see that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlement by the name of Vysyola. Today we have several adjustments on the map provided us by different pro-Russian and neutral mappers, and the most important, we have the same confirmation published by pro-Ukrainian sources. When talking about the pro-Ukrainian sources, they reported that currently the tree line between the settlement of Vysyola and the edge positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation was already marked by the Ukrainians as a gray zone or contested area, which means that the Russians are trying to enter the settlement exactly using this road to attack, and the main purpose of the Russians is to establish control over the farms that are located in the northwestern part of this village. So the Russians continue, and as we discussed in the previous videos, the main purpose of the Russians in this direction is the settlement by the name of Kamar. If the Russians are able to take under control this, let's say, pocket, this salient, this will lead to significant problems for the armed force of the Ukraine on the territory of the villages of Adratne, Bogatyr and Rozliv. Basically, this territory would be cotton cauldron, another pocket created by the Russians. Of course, to finish the creation of the cauldron, of this pocket, the Russians need to intensify their activities in the direction of the Dnipro region. So they need to create another pocket in the northern part. They need to take under control the territories like like this. And after this, we're gonna see the same story as we used to see in the Kurakhova, in the city of Kurakhova, Uspienovka, and many other villages and towns in the South Donetsk direction. Probably the most important updates of the previous 24 hours are coming from the territory of the Zaporizhzhia direction. If you remember, during the previous several days, we've been receiving lots of different updates from different sources, both pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainians, and neutral resources, that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the area of Stepovo, Mali, Sherbaki, and we got a lot of reports that the Russians captured some territories, some streets, but as for the end of the 16th of March, we didn't have even a single video that can confirm this. And by the morning of the 17th of March, we received the first video from the most central part of the settlement by the name of Mali Sherbaki. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were after withdrawing and attacking the Russian units and the soldiers of the armed force of the Russian Federation on the territory of the village. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map because one of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point. So we see that the information regarding the settlements, all these settlements, were correct. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and we see that this offensive is gaining momentum. And that's it for the short video. Military summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.